There we go. Great. Listen, welcome everybody to the podcast today. I'm very, very happy to have on Kate Forbes, which is great. Known Kate actually probably over the years for a long time. Our paths have crossed, and to be frank, you've always been very approachable, and you've listened, and you've done your best. I will give you that straight off. I have no problem at all. What I would like to do is just speak about a couple of things because I know we're pressed for time, and I'm not going to give people's opinions or be confrontational or anything like this. What I would like to do, Kate, if it's okay with you, is just to get your impression about things. And I think the best way to do that is for me to just be honest about how I see just a couple of things that I think are very, very important at the present. So one of them is economics, and you being the finance minister will tie in with this. So, in my simple way, for many, many decades, I've seen, the world change. And to try to be quick, inequality is growing across the board, especially, you can see this in the UK. And I would argue, haven't got time to argue it here, but, the driving force here is basically corporations. Okay, I really do think this is true, and ever so more now with the way things are. And I'll just give you a couple of things that I've just caught up with recently. I didn't realize there's 60,000 lobbyists in Brussels alone. At the European, for the European Parliament. Another thing is as you know, the spending is going up. The UK Parliament is wanting to get up to 5% on defence spending. At the expense of all the poorest people in society, the elderly, and all the rest of it. So I see corporations, or specifically unregulated, corporations, or deregulated. If we look back to the crisis of 2008, and all what we're experiencing now, and even to the point now where that the biggest part of this, the military industrial complex, is funding wars, funding genocides. Let's be honest here in Palestine. So I see corporations as a really, really big problem. So what I'd like to ask you is specifically, how do you view this, especially in the light that, I mean, I understand that you're quite an advocate for special economic zones and free ports. And I don't pretend to know everything about this, and maybe you can give me a few points, because I know it's not all pros or cons. I know it's a mixture of the two. So I'm just wondering if you could help me out, because, like I say, the way I see it, I see a real growing divide, even to the point now where I think people can see it, even though they might not understand it. They can see this inequality growing, and it's creating chaos. It's even creating wars. Can you just give me your opinion on this, if you wouldn't mind, please, Kate? Thank you.
So, wage inequality is the defining issue of our day. And the figures confirm that. So, some of the most staggering figures were published by Future Economy Scotland in May this year. And I'd strongly recommend that you and any of your listeners check this out, because it will blow your mind what that means for people and households across Scotland. So they concluded that in 2024, between 2008 and 2024, real median weekly earnings for full-time workers was just, get this, £8 higher than they were in 2008, 16 years ago. That is equivalent to an increase of 1% over the last 16 years. And that is, they would argue, completely unprecedented. Never in modern times, this is a direct quote, have
Yeah.
Scots seen their earnings grow so little over such a long period. Just to bring that to life, if real earnings had grown at their pre-financial crisis trend of 2.2% per year since 2008, the average Scottish worker would be £297 a week better off, equivalent to, make sure you're sitting down, over £15,000 per year. So let's make that real in terms of people's wages. So the average full-time worker in Scotland earns £38,464 a year. If earnings had grown in line with how they were growing before the 2008 financial crisis, the same worker would be earning £53,923 today. And I imagine that those figures alone, many of your listeners would have said, I would love to be on the average wage of
Yes,
£38,464.
please.
So just think how huge an extra £15,000 a year is. And I see that wage stagnation as being at the root of most of our social ills in Scotland today, and what is driving people to the extremes of political and public discourse. Because wage inequality is the source of higher levels of child poverty. It is the source of health inequality because we know that poverty is a significant determinator of health outcomes.
Mhm.
It is the source of people's feelings about whether they are well represented, whether politicians are listening to them. And in walks reform who say we've got simplistic answers, we've got simplistic solutions. It's a source of growing levels of social incohesion, of people feeling like they've been left behind and
Mhm.
are fed up, frustrated. So, in multiple elections, it means that apathy starts to win. People feel disenfranchised and so on. So, you can see where I'm going with all of this. And it gives some flesh to the bones that you outlined in your questions. So this isn't just about how you feel. It's not just about what I feel. It's what the statistics tell us it needs to change. And
Absolutely.
post-COVID, there is also a massive issue where during COVID, billions of pounds of funding was spent essentially keeping organizations intact. And some people got furlough, but that furlough either replaced or didn't quite replace money they would have otherwise received. So workers were not better off, but those billions went somewhere. So where did they go?
Mhm.
They were spent. It's not that money disappears. So who
I think
benefited
it does.
during those years? So I think just to make those points now, we could have a brief conversation about free ports because I certainly
Well, I
wouldn't.
was just going quickly. Can I just interject
Yeah.
there? I mean, where does I mean basically what you're talking about? Some people call it wage theft. Where has all that decrease in people's not catching up with inflation with their wages? Why is that? I mean, to me, like I said, to me this is to me I would essentially say that is the change that has undergone for decades now and is speeding up. The change from the national to the privatized or the corporate structure. I see that's why wages have gone down. I mean, if we look at poor countries around the world where we export, uh, poverty or poor people make stuff for us at terrible rates of pay. I mean, so to me, this is where the wage theft comes. This is why inflation is all seems to be higher recently. Well, is higher recently than wage increases. So, sorry, what do you say about that?
Yeah.
Where
So
where, where
so
does it
um
stem from?
again, if you look at the figures, and I am leaning very heavily, by the way, on this report from Future Economy Scotland, Laurie McFarlane, a shout out for him. Um, the he tracks it, and there's two particular interventions. So, obviously, the global financial crisis was a massive, significant intervention because real weekly earnings fell sharply in the aftermath of that crash. But then they start to recover a little bit from 2015 to 2021 and then massively decline in 2022. Why? Surging inflation. And UK inflation was stubbornly higher for longer than other G7 countries. And there was two reasons predominantly for that. One was energy prices significantly increasing, and we can talk about why that was, um, despite being in an energy wealthy nation. And the other reason you can't avoid is Brexit, because Brexit added significant costs to trade. It meant that perishable goods were sitting at the border for longer. Those prices have to go somewhere. So the higher costs ended up getting put on top of people's grocery bills. So grocery bills went up, energy prices went up by a factor that was remarkable, and it was and wages
Yeah,
stagnated.
stagnated. Yeah.
So that is why there was such a colossal impact post 2022 in terms of people's bottom line. And people, talk about inflation and say, well, isn't it wonderful that inflation is lower than it has been? Forgetting inflation is has a cumulative impact. So it's not that prices have decreased, they're just not going up as fast as they were in 2022. So we celebrate the fact that inflation is more under control than it was, but
Hmm.
you can't undo the harm of those years. And it still is having an impact, and people have not seen their wages go up. And that's despite efforts that we've made by being the first country in the UK to make so many strides on the real living wage. That's
Hmm.
despite the fact the Scottish Government being one of the first real living wage employers. The number of real living wage employers has significantly increased. We take fair work seriously in terms of how we give out grants and all the rest of it. And so that's all important. We don't hold on to the macro levers of employment law, so we can't compel the payment of the real living wage. But that
Okay.
fleshes out a little bit of what is, you asked me why, and that
Yeah.
is a little bit
If
of
you
an indication of
if
why.
if you if you go back to, you was going to mention about free ports and special
Yeah.
economic zones when I interjected. Thank you.
Yeah, so I certainly wouldn't characterize myself as an advocate for that. I was obviously part of the negotiations with the UK government, and I'm really proud that we managed to negotiate a much better deal for Scotland. So, uniquely in Scotland, the two green free ports, had requirements that no other free port in the UK had, and actually since Labour came in, they have retrospectively uh, taken what we did and applied them to the other places. So it included fair work as being a criteria for any company that wanted to benefit. It included a requirement to have some of the most ambitious decarbonising plans that every company that wanted to benefit had to adapt, and there was significantly more money for the free ports in Scotland than there would be elsewhere. And so I completely reject a lot of the misunderstandings, I think the intentional distortion of the truth in and around the two green free ports. They would have happened irrespective of what the Scottish Government did, but they wouldn't have had the emphasis on fair work or the emphasis on climate change compatibility or the significant additional financial contributions if we hadn't got involved. And the last thing I would,
Just for,
yeah,
sorry, go on.
yeah, the
I
last
was
thing
just
I
going
would
to
say
say,
is, I've long been a strong believer in the Highlands, particularly, that key economic interventions in areas that have been left behind have often made the difference to depopulation or not. So, a good example of that historically was always the hydro schemes. And, at the time, people forget hydro was completely lambasted. And yet, because there was hydro schemes in the Highlands, they accessed electricity. I mean, people forget that the last places in the UK to get electricity was the Highlands, as recently as the 70s. So we still see the housing that was delivered through the hydro schemes. So and so on. But having a social conscience in the Highlands in the 1960s, the economist Donald Mackay said that the answer to the Highland problem was to induce movement of people out of the Highlands, because nobody would ever want to invest in the Highlands. So get people out because there would never be any capital invested. You then have the Highlands and Islands Development Board focusing massively on creating jobs, creating business opportunities, creating economic prosperity. And the Highlands had seen more rapid uh, economic prosperity per capita than other parts of Scotland. So when you look at the, particularly in and around Cromarty Firth, all this nonsense about the fact that, I live in a green Freeport designated area and nobody's taken my house off me. So this nonsense that, we're all at risk because we live in and around it is nonsense. I look at it, and I've not benefited at all from it, but I've not lost my house. I still own my house. So it can't be the case that they suddenly own all the land. All of that's a lot of nonsense. Um, but it becomes a hive of activity. So you then have significant opportunities being created, particularly for small businesses, small supply chain businesses in some of our towns and villages that wouldn't have work if it wasn't for this suddenly becoming a focus of activity. So I see opportunities, and I think there's a lot of misinformation around, and I'm also of the view that it would have happened irrespective, but it's certainly an improved offer.
I think, I mean, if I get this correctly, I mean, I understand the sort of economic, situation enough to understand that, you need, foreign direct investment and to be able, to utilize staff, skill forces and stuff like this. But what concerns me is, and I've not seen anything concrete to stop it. I mean, this is what I'm talking about, unregulated corporations or unregulated capitalism, because what I see in special economic zones and free ports is literally depending, the way I see it is depending on the corporate structure to accept that they have certain responsibilities. But that doesn't mean that they have to do them. I mean, I see this as, and if I look at the history of corporations and just how they're run, literally how they're created, I don't think you can rely on corporate goodwill. Please forgive me if I sound a bit naive there, but this is the way I see it.
But that's why I think there's so much misinformation around the green free ports, because that doesn't apply. That's, in a sense, Eddie, is similar to what I'm saying, which is we set out very clearly the requirements around fair work and around the climate change, in particular, decarbonisation, that was
But
required.
how do you legislate for that? How do you, I
We
mean,
have
how would you
legislated.
get a contract to
But
show that the corporations will do that?
that's in place. It's legislated for. So there's a number of different parts of the public sector involved. So you've got Highland Council, you've got the Scottish Government, and you've got the UK Government. And they have set out really clear criteria before any organisation is able to access support. And you talked earlier about foreign direct investment. I mean, what I'm most interested in is domestic investment.
Hmm.
What I want to see
Okay.
is the the smaller business owner that is employing two staff in a remote Highland village because they recognize you need to earn to eat and you need to eat to be able to stay in that village, or else you're going to have to move to Glasgow and Edinburgh.
Hmm.
That wee business now has opportunity that they wouldn't have had otherwise. That's what I'm all about. That is the backbone of the Scottish economy is built on the backbone of small and medium-sized businesses. Highland communities as well as I do. Someone wants to keep living in Kinlochleven, they're going to need a job. How do you
Hmm.
support them with a job? And it can't just be public sector, because ultimately you need to be able to raise the revenue to reinvest. So I was in Kilchoan, or near Kilchoan, not quite Kilchoan,
A long way.
in a long way, a couple of days ago. And whether it's Kilchoan, I was in Lochaline, Drimnin, these places, there's real morale. There's a real morale boost at the moment because you're seeing that job creation happening. And how do I know that? Because they're needing more housing. They're needing more housing. And now they need childcare because there's more kids. For the first time in the Isle of Canna, 50% are under the age of 35. And they're there because they've got employment. and they're creating their own opportunities. So that, I think, is the approach, and I think a lot of the characterizations of
Mhm.
what's happening in the Highlands
Yeah, I can see
around the
that. You,
Green
you can
Freeport.
you can definitely see that happen, and I hope it's managed well because I mean, whatever, like you said, there's lots of reasons why, but the areas, like you said, the remote areas, we was there very recently ourselves just last week, and yeah, all around these areas are getting more busy. Let's move on because I know you'll be short of time.
And I'm afraid I think I'm going to have to head
Two
because I do have
minutes.
other people. Okay, go for it.
Okay, 2 minutes. Just quickly about independence, and I'll be really quick. So, look, Kate, over the last few years, membership of the SNP has hemorrhaged. MPs seem to be hemorrhaging now, and MSPs are leaving. So, to be really quick, honest to God, I mean, 60% of people apparently in the polls, or near as close, want independence. Yet it's only 30% for SNP support. Now, really quickly, there's been a growing divide between SNP membership and the general independence movement. When we look at Sweeney, what he's doing now, 48 branches saying to do this and to do that, I really feel we're getting nowhere. Just tell me what your thoughts are on that, and then you better be off.
Two quick thoughts. We know how an independence referendum was delivered last time. So within the independence movement, we love talking about process, and that's important because we need to know what the route is. We also know that process never inspired anybody who's currently a no voter to vote yes. So what inspires people is envisaging a fairer, more prosperous future. We know how it happened, and it was through electing a majority of SNP MSPs. And the second thing is that our movement is richer for the diversity of opinion and the debates and the discussions that happen. So you know, Eddie, that there's lots of people across the Highlands. They may have been in the SNP before. They're now still independent supporters. They're no longer necessarily in the SNP. We have good, frank, open debates. But the bottom line is working with those who are not yet inspired to be inspired to support independence. And I think there is a unique opportunity right now to do that. We, 5 years ago, or well, actually, as recently as 18 months ago, we were saying, look what Westminster is doing. That's dreadful. Vote yes. And people said, but Labour will be different. You just need another government. Okay, Labour are in, and I challenge anyone to tell me that things are any different. So you can rearrange, you can repaint the boat, but it doesn't change the seaworthiness of the vessel. And we talked about wage stagnation at the beginning, people feeling left behind, a broken economy. It is not working for you. So you've given the Tories a go, you've given Labour a go, you're still struggling. The next election is going to be a question of hope. It's going to be a question
uh,
of narrative. And
yes.
inspiring people to vote for a hope-filled future and a better future is what we need to do at the next election, because that's the only route by which an independence referendum has been delivered in the past.
Okay, I'll finish on this note. I mean, because we should quickly just throw this in as a last thing. Jeremy Corbyn's party, I believe, is going to get bigger and bigger. I think it's going to make a difference because people are fed up. And I'll be quite frank with you. I've said this to some of my friends, and other people are saying it now. Whilst independence is going nowhere, honest to God, because we are under the yoke of of the UK at the moment, if it comes to the general election and the next general election, and Corbyn's up and running, I'll likely be voting Corbyn in that Westminster election, and I wouldn't blame anybody else for voting the same, because as you know, we're talking about inequality here, and people's lives are getting poorer and more difficult all the time, and we need radical change, and unfortunately, I don't think the SNP are near enough radical enough. But I want to thank you, Kate. I really do appreciate you coming on and speaking to all our viewers. It's really much appreciated. I wish you the best. I think you've made it's a tough decision. We haven't got time to go in with your kids. Of course, you know you're only going to have them once, so enjoy them. And I wish you all the best for you and
Thanks
your
very much.
family.
And we
No
may
worries.
cross paths as Highland
I hope
parents.
so. I hope so. Maybe one day you'll come back on the podcast. That would be really
Wonderful.
nice.
Thanks very much, Eddie. See you
Thank you
later.
very much, Kate. All the best to you. Thank you. Okay, where's my record button? What's happening now? The configuration. Want to stop recording. Where's recording? Where is it? Did that record? Shouldn't just press start. Start. See if that didn't record, that would be crazy, man. Right, where is it? So tools,